They sat me next to the industrial ice bucket. Not the quaint floral centerpiece table near the bride and groom, not the row for honored guests, or even the quiet corner for shy family friends. No. I was placed at a metal folding chair wedged beside the buzzing beverage cooler right where the kitchen door swung open every 30 seconds. The servers barely looked at me as they rushed past trays clattering. If I leaned just slightly to my right, I could hear the ice melting. That was my soundtrack for my daughter's wedding. I suppose it was meant to look accidental. The seating chart was very full. Someone had told me apologetically while handing me the place card. I smiled, nodded, and sat exactly where they wanted me, out of the way, neatly tucked behind the rhythm of plastic cups and soft drinks. Invisible. I did not complain. I folded my napkin across my lap, crossed my ankles neatly, and offered polite nods to the handful of strangers sharing my exile. One of them was the DJ's aunt, I think. Another worked in catering. No one seemed to realize that I was Margaret Lawson, 55 years old, mother of the bride. Or perhaps they did realize and simply did not care. Ava. My daughter had looked beautiful. Radiant, glowing, all those wedding adjectives people throw around. She wore my mother's veil, the one with tiny pearls stitched into the lace. I had spent 6 hours steaming that veil by hand the night before. She had not said thank you. That was fine. She was busy, distracted, caught in the whirlwind of photographers and flower girls and champagne. Her new husband, Graham Dorsey, had the smooth smile of a man who always knew where the camera was. Tall, sharp suit, perfectly tousled hair. The kind of man who said ma'am in a way that somehow felt like a slap. He had first entered our lives barely 9 months before the wedding, and yet here he was, center stage, giving speeches about family and legacy and building a future. At the reception, he raised his glass to me. To Margaret, he said, for raising such an extraordinary daughter. The room clapped. I smiled. It was the tight, distant kind of smile people give at funerals and family court. Later that evening, while the guests danced and the lights dimmed to golden hues, Graham found his way to my side. He crouched slightly, putting himself eye level with me, all charm and concern. You know, he said, brushing a bit of invisible lint from his sleeve, Ava and I were talking about you just the other night. Oh, I replied. Yes, about your future. About how we want to make sure you are protected. Financially, emotionally. You've been alone for so long, it must be difficult to manage everything yourself. My fingers tightened slightly on the stem of my glass. I offered him my sweetest smile. That is so thoughtful of you, Graham. Really, I feel very supported. He grinned, squeezed my shoulder, and moved off to mingle with a group of tech investors who seemed far more interesting to him. I watched him from behind my plastic cup. Studied the way he moved, the way he shook hands with older men, and barely glanced at anyone who could not advance his ambitions. His attention was transactional, calculated, efficient. I did not say a word. Not that night, not the next morning. But 4 days later, Graham showed up at my front door with a bouquet of white lilies and a notary public. That was when I knew. It was finally starting. My name is Margaret Lawson. Most people call me Maggie, though lately I have found myself responding more often to silence than to sound. I am 55 years old, a widow for just over 4 years. My husband, David Lawson, passed suddenly from a stroke while walking our dog in the park one spring morning. One moment he was upright checking his watch and holding a leash, and the next he was gone just like that. No time for goodbyes, no dramatic hospital scenes, just a phone call and a white sheet. We had been married for 31 years. David was not a romantic man in the traditional sense. He never bought roses, never remembered anniversaries without help, and considered Valentine's Day a scam created by candy corporations. But he was loyal, meticulous, and fiercely protective of the people he loved. He had built a company from nothing, working in advanced building materials, focusing on eco-safe insulation and fireproof composites. Boring to most, but revolutionary to the people who knew the industry. When he passed, he left me not only our home in the hills outside Portland, but also $33 million in diversified assets. Real estate stocks, patents, royalties. The number still feels like fiction when I say it aloud. David had been private about money, always reminding me not to discuss finances with anyone, even family. Especially family. That included Ava, our daughter, our only child. David loved Ava with his whole being, but he also worried about her. She had a softness, a desire to be liked that sometimes clouded her judgment. She trusted too easily, forgave too quickly, and avoided confrontation with a dedication that bordered on pathological. I used to think it was endearing. Now I wonder if it made her vulnerable. After David's death, I withdrew from almost everything. I took a leave of absence from my interior design business, canceled my memberships in the Art Council and the neighborhood book club. I stopped hosting dinner parties and attending charity auctions. I spent months reading in silence, tending to David's roses, answering emails with one-sentence replies. The world grew quiet and I let it. I had a few close friends, but I kept them at a distance. Grief, after all, is an isolating force. It made me brittle, uninterested, distant. Ava tried to get me to open up. She called, texted, sent articles about grief counseling and weekend retreats. I smiled, thanked her, and ignored them all. Then came Graham. A sudden presence, a sharp, bright force that swept Ava off her feet with curated compliments and polished sincerity. He said all the right things in just the right tone. He brought her flowers, cooked elaborate meals, and offered to help her take control of her future. Within 6 months of meeting, they were engaged. I remember the moment Ava told me. We were having coffee on the back patio. She looked nervous, as if preparing to break bad news. Then she smiled, showed me the ring, and waited for my approval. I had nodded and said the right words. "Congratulations! I am so happy for you. You deserve this." But something in my stomach turned. I had never seen Graham sweat, never seen him flustered. He was too smooth, too curated, like a resume disguised as a man. I began to watch him more carefully. The little things. The way he asked about David's will just 2 weeks into dating Ava. The way he referred to my house as the Lawson estate when speaking to others. The way he glanced at my laptop screen when I paid bills. I told myself it was paranoia. Grief playing tricks. But deep down, I started to prepare. I called Clara Holt, the family lawyer David had trusted for 2 decades. I asked her to quietly audit all our holdings, double-check the protection on the trusts, and ensure that Ava had no access until she turned 35. David had insisted on that clause, and now I was grateful. Clara reassured me that everything was airtight. No one could touch the principal without my explicit consent. I breathed easier. And then the wedding came, all pomp and planning. Ava wanted something modern but timeless, minimalist, yet lush. I wrote a check, smiled in photos, and kept my suspicions to myself. No need to cause a scene. Yet. When they placed me next to the ice bucket, I understood exactly where I stood in this new arrangement. I was no longer the matriarch. I was the obstacle. Or at least that is what Graham assumed. Poor man. He had no idea who he was dealing with. Because while he saw a quiet widow sipping lukewarm soda next to a stack of plastic cups, what he did not see was the document in my safe, the one that named me sole trustee of the Lawson estate with full legal autonomy. What he did not see was the plan I had begun constructing the moment Ava introduced him to me. And what he would soon discover in the most painful way possible is that I had spent 4 years grieving, which meant I had also spent 4 years preparing. The day Graham showed up at my door, the sky was the kind of washed-out gray that Portland does so well. He arrived precisely at noon, holding a bouquet of white lilies and wearing a blazer that probably cost more than my monthly grocery bill. The notary stood slightly behind him, a younger woman in her 30s with a briefcase, polite smile, and eyes that flicked nervously between us. I opened the door slowly, wearing my gardening gloves, my hair pulled back in a loose knot. I had been trimming David's roses when I saw their car pull up. Graham smiled like he had just won a prize. "Margaret, you look well. Busy morning." I looked down at my gloves, then back at him. "Roses do not trim themselves," I replied, stepping aside. "Come in." He walked in like he belonged, commenting on the artwork in the hallway, pausing to compliment a framed photograph of Ava at age 10. The notary followed quietly, setting her briefcase down on the coffee table with a soft click. "This is Sophia Graham," said, gesturing to her. "She is here to help with some paperwork we discussed. Just a few things to make sure everything is in order. I raised an eyebrow. What things exactly? Graham's voice lowered into that concerned register people use when explaining bills to the elderly. Just some documents to ensure your financial and medical affairs are managed properly in case anything ever happens. You know, for peace of mind. He sat down, smoothing his blazer as if he were hosting a seminar. Ava and I have been talking a lot about your future. We just want to make sure you're protected, especially now that you're living alone. I sat across from him and nodded slowly. That's very considerate. I'm touched. He brightened. Great. Sophia, if you could. The notary opened her briefcase and pulled out a small stack of papers. The top sheet was labeled Durable Power of Attorney. I glanced down at the rest: medical directive, financial oversight, living trust amendment. My name printed neatly at the top of every page. I picked up the first sheet and held it lightly between my fingers. And you thought now was the best time for this? Graham nodded. The sooner the better. These things get complicated if you wait too long. He smiled like a dentist recommending a root canal. And Ava agrees with all of this. Of course, she just wants what's best for you. We both do. I studied his face for a long moment. Then I set the paper down and folded my hands. You're very efficient, Graham, and very confident. But I'm curious. What exactly do you think I need protection from? His smile faltered for the briefest second. Well, just the usual concerns. Scams, poor investment decisions, people taking advantage of your trusting nature. You mean people like you. He blinked. Excuse me. I leaned forward, my voice still calm. Graham, let's not insult each other. We both know this isn't about protecting me. This is about control. About accessing assets you think I can't manage. About moving me out of the way so you and Ava can live comfortably without obstacles. That is not fair. His voice tightened. I'm trying to help. No, you're trying to take. And you assumed I was too slow or too soft or too sentimental to see it. Sophia shifted uncomfortably. I stood up and walked to the fireplace. On the mantel was a small silver key. I picked it up slowly and turned back to him. Do you know what this key opens, Graham? He did not respond. It opens a fireproof safe in my basement. Inside that safe is a letter from my husband, a full inventory of our estate, and a trust agreement that cannot be altered by anyone but me. I have known what you are for months. I just wanted to see how far you would go. Graham stood up, face reddening. This is ridiculous. You are paranoid. I smiled. Am I? Because while you've been rehearsing your concern, I've been recording every word. I gestured to the bookshelf where a small blinking light glowed faintly. Audio and video. Today's little visit is now part of a growing file I have built on you. His mouth opened, then closed. Sophia stepped back, clearly startled. I suggest you take your notary and leave. And do not come back. The next conversation you have about my future will be with my attorney, and she is far less polite than I am. Graham hesitated. This isn't over. It is for you. He grabbed the documents, his lips a thin line, and stormed out, Sophia scrambling behind him. I closed the door quietly, removed my gloves, and exhaled. It had begun. After Graham left, I sat in the kitchen for nearly an hour without moving. The air felt thick, like everything in the house had shifted slightly. I listened to the silence, to the absence of his fake warmth, and I thought about the next move. I had not survived 31 years of marriage to a man like David without learning how to think in layers. David had been deliberate, strategic. He never revealed all his cards, and he trained me in his way to do the same. Long before his death, he had warned me about men like Graham. Charmers, opportunists, predators in tailored suits. He had seen them in business and boardrooms, even among family. That is why he had worked with Clara Holt to establish the trusts, the safeguards. Because he knew that love was not always enough to protect the people you leave behind. I made tea and walked out to the garden. The roses were blooming again defiantly despite the cool air. I clipped a few stems and brought them inside. As I arranged them in the vase on the kitchen table, I thought about Ava, my daughter, my girl with the wide eyes and open heart. She had always wanted to believe the best in people, even when they did not deserve it. I knew Graham had not told her everything. Perhaps he had spun it as helpful paperwork, maybe even as a surprise to take pressure off me. But she could not possibly know the extent of his manipulation. Not yet. The next morning, I called Clara. She had been expecting my call. We reviewed the recorded footage, the audio, the documents he had brought, and we began drafting a formal complaint. Clara also reached out to a private investigator she trusted, a woman named Karen Cho, who specialized in asset fraud and financial abuse. Within days, Karen had a file on Graham that was thicker than a phone book. Bankruptcy filings under multiple shell companies, a failed cryptocurrency investment scheme, a lawsuit settled quietly in Nevada involving a former fiancé who accused him of financial coercion. There were patterns. Ava was not the first, just the most recent, and possibly the most valuable. Clara and Karen began compiling everything: emails, financial record surveillance. Meanwhile, I played my part. I called Ava and invited her over for lunch. She was hesitant. Graham had apparently told her that I had overreacted to a legal form. Nothing to worry about, just a misunderstanding. He was trying to help. That was his line. Always helping. When she arrived, she looked tired. The wedding glow had faded into stress. She hugged me quickly, sat down, and picked at the food. "Mom, what happened with Graham?" "He said you accused him of trying to steal from you." I poured her tea, calm as ever. "Ava, I want you to listen to something." I pulled out my tablet, opened the recording from his visit, and pressed play. For the next 20 minutes, she listened in silence. Her face changed slowly from confusion to disbelief to something harder to watch: hurt. When the recording ended, she sat back in her chair, blinking quickly. I did not speak. I let the silence settle between us. "He told me you were struggling," she whispered, "that you needed guidance, that you were making erratic choices." I nodded once. "That is how it starts. They isolate you from the truth, from people, from your own voice." Her voice trembled. "Did he do this to other women?" I handed her the file Karen had compiled. Ava read it without speaking. Page after page of details. Dates, amounts, victims. When she looked up, her eyes were different. No longer soft, no longer naive. "How do we stop him?" she asked. That was the moment the roles reversed. No longer mother and daughter. Now we were two women standing on the same side of a line. I told her everything about the trust, the safes, the letters David had left me, the protections I had kept hidden, and together we made a plan. We would not confront him immediately. We would not scream or accuse. We would let him think he was winning, because predators like Graham always overplayed their hand. All we had to do was wait and document everything. I looked at my daughter, no longer a bride, no longer a girl. She looked back at me with a quiet fury I had never seen before. "He married the wrong family," she said. "Yes," I replied, "and now he is going to find out exactly how wrong." The next 2 weeks unfolded like a quiet war. On the surface, everything remained polite. Ava returned to her routine. She answered Graham's calls, smiled at his jokes, played the part of the trusting wife. But behind the scenes, she forwarded messages to Clara, recorded their conversations, and logged his movements. Graham seemed pleased. He thought the storm had passed. He told friends I had been difficult but was coming around. He visited often, dropping off groceries I never requested and offering to review some investments with me. I let him. I invited him to lunch, let him explain compound interest to me like I had not managed a multi-million-dollar estate for over a decade. I let him print charts, create folders, draw diagrams. I played the curious widow, wide-eyed and overwhelmed. He thrived in that illusion. It made him feel powerful. What he did not know was that every time he opened his mouth, another piece of evidence was added to a growing dossier. Clara was preparing to file charges. Karen had discovered that Graham was still in contact with an offshore account manager in the Caymans. Ava even found a burner phone hidden in their bedroom closet filled with encrypted messages and transaction logs. But the moment I knew we had him cornered came quietly on a Wednesday morning. Graham arrived at my house with a leather folder and a new urgency. He spoke with softened tones, as if comforting someone on the edge of senility. He asked about my sleep, about my medications. He gently suggested that it might be time to think about assisted living just in case. Then he opened the folder. Inside was a newly revised document, a living trust transfer. It would shift all financial authority to him and Ava in the event of declining cognition. He had added a clause, a subtle one, but one that would let him act unilaterally if two witnesses deemed me mentally unfit. I read it, twice, slowly. Then I looked at him and I smiled. I see. You're worried about me. He leaned forward. Deeply. We just want to protect you. I nodded. That is so thoughtful. And would those witnesses be by chance Ava and Sophia, your notary? He blinked just once before recovering. They're qualified. That is what matters. Of course. I tapped the folder with one finger. Let me think about it. I want to be sure. Take your time. He stood, adjusted his jacket, and kissed my cheek like a priest offering last rites. As soon as the door closed behind him, I called Clara. It is time I said. We are done pretending. The next day, Ava confronted him at home. She played the second recording, the one from the assisted living conversation. She asked him to explain the offshore accounts, the burner phone, the trust revisions. Graham did not deny anything. Instead, he pivoted. He told her I had gone paranoid, that I was unstable, that I was trying to drive a wedge between them, that if she really loved him, she would help him secure the paperwork before I became legally incapable of making decisions. Ava listened. Then she said something I will remember for the rest of my life. My mother may be grieving, but she is not weak. And you are about to find out what happens when you try to rob the wrong woman. She left the house and came straight to mine. Her hands were shaking. Her eyes were sharp. I want to file for divorce, she said, and I want to help take him down. I hugged her. Then we sat at the kitchen table, the same one where David had signed our will 20 years before, and we finalized the next step. Graham thought he was hunting a victim. What he did not know was that he had walked into a trap 4 months ago. And now the doors were about to close. This was no longer about protecting money. It was about justice. It was about David. It was about every woman who had ever been told she was too soft, too slow, too sentimental to fight back. We were done playing defense. It was time to go on the attack. The trap was simple and elegant. Clara coordinated with the district attorney's office and arranged for law enforcement to be present. Karen gathered the last round of evidence, including bank transfers tied to Graham's shell corporations, and notarized testimonies from 2 of his former victims. Ava reached out to Graham and told him she had convinced me to sign the documents. She said I had finally come to my senses. He bought it instantly. He responded with a flurry of texts about efficiency and paperwork and making sure we had the right witnesses. He insisted on bringing the notary again. Sophia, Ava agreed. We set the meeting at my house. Saturday afternoon, 3 o'clock. I baked a pie. I wore a blue cardigan and a string of pearls David had given me on our 10th anniversary. I looked like someone preparing for retirement. Harmless. Soft. Graham arrived on time, radiating confidence. Sophia followed him inside, her expression unreadable. We sat at the kitchen table. I served tea. Graham placed the documents in front of me along with a new pen still in the packaging. It is all standard, he said. Just sign here, initial there. You will feel better, trust me. I smiled and nodded. I began signing, slowly. My hand trembled slightly on purpose. Graham leaned in, watching every stroke. When I finished the second page, I paused. Graham, I said gently, there is something you should know. What is it? He asked, already impatient. I think I have a bit more money than you expected. He blinked. More money? Yes. David had some accounts I only recently uncovered. Stocks, real estate holdings, royalties from patents he never listed under our family name. Graham's voice dropped. How much more are we talking about? I smiled and looked him straight in the eyes. 33 million. He went still. Sophia looked up sharply. I reached under the table and tapped the recorder. The red light flashed twice. 2 uniformed officers entered through the side door. Graham Dorsey, one of them said, "You are under arrest for attempted fraud, financial coercion, and conspiracy to commit elder abuse. You have the right to remain silent." The look on his face was a masterpiece, a portrait of shock, betrayal, and unfiltered rage. "This is entrapment," he shouted as the officers cuffed him. "You set me up." I did, I replied calmly, and I am very good at it. Sophia stood visibly shaken and followed the officers out, muttering something about needing a lawyer. I closed the folder gently and handed it to Clara, who had entered through the back just moments before. The DA will love this, she said. Textbook case. Ava stood in the hallway watching silently. She did not cry. She did not speak. But when Graham passed her in handcuffs, she said 4 words. I hope you rot. That evening, the news broke. Local businessman arrested in elder fraud sting. The segment included stock footage from the wedding, a blurry photo of Graham smiling with Ava, and a brief statement from the district attorney's office confirming multiple charges. I poured a glass of wine and sat on the porch, watching the sun dip behind the trees. The wind moved softly through the garden. David's roses glowed in the fading light. Ava came outside and sat beside me. Do you think he ever really loved me? She asked. I think he loved what he thought you could give him. That is not the same thing. She nodded slowly. I feel stupid. You were in love. That is not stupid. But what you did today, standing up, facing the truth, helping bring him down, that is strength. She leaned against my shoulder, silent for a long time. Will it get easier? She whispered. Not immediately, but eventually. And when it does, you will be stronger for it. The phone buzzed on the table. It was Clara. She had just received word from the DA. Graham was being held without bail. They had found more victims in 3 other states. The case was growing. Rapidly. And thanks to the recordings, the documents, and the testimony Ava had provided, it was airtight. This was no longer just about me, or even about Ava. This was about exposing a predator, making sure he never did this to anyone else. David would have been proud, not just of the outcome, but of the method, of the patience, the precision, the quiet strength. Some wars are not fought with noise. Some are won with silent strategy and timing. As the stars began to show above the trees, I looked at my daughter, my house, my life, and I realized that even in the deepest grief, you can plant seeds of justice. And when the time is right, those seeds bloom into something fierce, something beautiful, something no predator expects. The following week was a blur of legal form statements and strategy meetings. Clara met with the assistant district attorney and provided every piece of evidence we had gathered. The case expanded rapidly. Karen continued digging and uncovered email chains that linked Graham to 2 men under investigation in Arizona for similar financial abuse schemes. One of them had even been using the same notary, Sophia, who was now cooperating in exchange for reduced charges. Ava filed for divorce the next day. She cited financial fraud, emotional manipulation, and personal endangerment. The papers were served to Graham in his holding cell. His reaction was reportedly violent. He shouted through the bars, claiming I had brainwashed his wife that we were conspiring against him. The judge denied bail again after reviewing our recordings. The court date was set. In the meantime, Ava moved back into her childhood bedroom. It was strange having her in the house again, but also comforting. We talked more in those few days than we had in the last 5 years. She asked me about David, about how I had managed things after his death, about how I had hidden the extent of our wealth for so long. I told her the truth, because love does not require full disclosure. Trust does. And she needed the truth now more than ever. Karen reached out to 3 other women Graham had dated in the past decade. 2 agreed to testify. 1 sent a written statement. They all told similar stories. Graham had swept in, made them feel cherished, and then slowly begun to isolate them, question their judgment, suggested they sign documents, shift control. By the time they realized what was happening, it was too late. But not this time. This time, he had picked the wrong target. Clara contacted a journalist she knew from her law school days, a woman named Stephanie Wells, who specialized in investigative reporting about elder abuse and financial crime. Stephanie interviewed me and Ava separately, then spent 3 days cross-referencing public records court filings and company histories. Her article went live on the Sunday edition of the Oregon Standard. The headline read, "Predator in a Suit: How One Woman Turned the Tables on a Financial Manipulator." The response was overwhelming. Emails poured in. dozens of elderly people and their families sharing their own stories of betrayal. Ava and I spent hours reading them together. Some were heartbreaking, some were infuriating. All were familiar, and it confirmed what I already knew. Graham was not the exception. He was part of a pattern, a network, a system that preyed on those perceived as slow, weak, isolated. Stephanie's story caught national attention. Within a week, we were contacted by a legal advocacy group that offered to help expand the investigation. Clara coordinated with state authorities and confirmed that the case would be pursued as part of a larger fraud ring. Meanwhile, Ava began organizing a support group, not just for victims but for their families, a space for people to share experiences, compare legal advice, and rebuild their lives. She called it the Lawson Line, a nod to the invisible boundary we had drawn between predators and the people who refused to be prey. On the day of the preliminary hearing, we sat in the courtroom side by side. Graham was brought in wearing an orange jumpsuit, handcuffed and furious. He avoided our eyes. The prosecution laid out the charges: 6 counts of attempted financial exploitation, 3 counts of conspiracy to defraud, 2 counts of coercion, 1 count of attempted elder abuse. Clara's evidence made it clear. The judge ordered a full trial. As we left the courthouse, reporters swarmed. I gave a single statement: sometimes the best way to protect your family is to be dangerous. Let that be the lesson. That night, Ava and I sat in the living room watching the coverage. I handed her a glass of wine. To David, I said, "For preparing us." She raised her glass. "And to you, Mom, for making sure the preparation was not wasted." The future was still uncertain, but for the first time in years, it felt like something we could shape, not just survive, and that more than anything was victory. The trial lasted 9 days. Every morning, Ava and I walked into that courthouse side by side, past the news cameras and the whispers. Graham sat at the defense table looking smaller each day, his suits replaced by prison khakis, his charm worn thin by the weight of mounting evidence. Witness after witness took the stand: the women he had tried to control, the financial experts who dissected his shell companies, Sophia the notary who had turned state witness and laid bare the process of deception. Then I testified. Calm, precise. I recounted every detail, from the moment he placed his hand on my shoulder at the wedding to the hour he left my house in handcuffs. I showed the court the recordings, the documents, the false signatures, the way he had smiled while trying to steal my life. I finished with a quote from David's final letter: "Protect yourself, Margaret. And if they come for you, do not be quiet. Make noise. Make history." The courtroom was silent when I stepped down. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. Guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced Graham to 18 years in state prison without the possibility of parole for at least 12. He showed no remorse, no apology, only anger. As he was led away, he glared at Ava and said, "This is all your mother's fault." She stood up. "No, this is your fault. You tried to exploit the wrong woman." The final blow came a month later when the Attorney General's office announced they were opening a broader investigation into similar fraud networks. Clara had shared our evidence. They found dozens of linked cases across 3 states. The story that began in my living room had turned into a statewide cleanup operation. I received letters from other widows, from families who had lost everything, from sons and daughters thanking me for taking a stand. And one quiet afternoon, a woman knocked on my door. Her name was Beatrice, 72, alone. She had nearly signed over her home to a man who promised to help manage her taxes. She had read about my case and changed her mind at the last moment. "You saved my life," she said. I told her no. "You saved your own life. I just gave you a reason not to doubt your instincts." Ava expanded the Lawson Line. It became more than a support group. It became a movement. They held seminars, online workshops, legal education sessions for retirees and their families. They built a community, a wall of shared wisdom, and I funded it, quietly, anonymously, using a portion of the trust David had left me, because money, like grief, only becomes powerful when it is used to protect something worth keeping. One evening, Ava sat with me on the porch as the sun faded behind the trees. She looked older, not sad, just stronger. "Do you ever miss him?" she asked. "Every day, but less painfully now. More like a presence than an absence." She nodded. "Do you think he would be proud of what we did?" I smiled. David never cared about recognition, but he cared about justice, about doing what needed to be done even when no one was watching. So, yes, he would be proud. She leaned her head on my shoulder and whispered, "I am proud too." And that was the real ending. Not the courtroom, not the headlines, but the quiet restoration of something that had nearly been stolen. Dignity, clarity, strength. Graham thought he was marrying into vulnerability. What he found instead was a fortress built over decades, guarded by love and sharpened by grief. He picked the wrong widow. And now, wherever he sits in that cold cell, he knows that some women do not fold. Some women rise, and some like me stay silent just long enough to strike. The story ends not with his downfall, but with our ascent, with legacy turned into protection, and with one final truth. If you underestimate a woman who has lost everything, be ready to learn how little she has left to fear.